I'm about to show you something that completely contradicts what you're seeing in the headlines, and it reveals why Iran's latest move in the Strait of Hormuz might be the most desperate gamble in the regime's 46-year history. While mainstream media reports that Iran is defying Trump's blockade and breaking through American naval pressure, the reality unfolding right now is actually the exact opposite. What looks like Iranian defiance is actually the death rattle of a regime that has run out of options and is about to discover that Trump's 2025 strategy is nothing like the Obama-era policies that Tehran learned to exploit. Just 73 minutes ago, Iranian state television broadcast footage showing what they claim are 5 oil tankers successfully departing Karg Island with full cargoes of crude oil, totaling approximately 10 million barrels. The IRGC Navy released video of fast attack boats escorting these vessels through Iranian territorial waters. Supreme Leader Khamenei's official account posted a statement declaring that the era of American diktat in Persian Gulf waters has ended, and that Iran's oil will flow to those who need it, regardless of illegal sanctions. Sounds like a victory, doesn't it? Sounds like Iran just shattered Trump's blockade. But here's what Iranian state media isn't showing you, and what changes absolutely everything. This isn't the Obama administration offering negotiations while Iran plays for time. This isn't the Biden administration imposing sanctions while looking the other way at violations. This is Trump's maximum pressure doctrine taken to its logical conclusion. Economic strangulation so complete that Iran's choices become surrender or collapse. And the next 48 to 72 hours will reveal which path Tehran is forced to take. If you want to understand the real strategy behind this crisis, why Iran's defiance is actually accelerating its own destruction, and where this is headed as Trump's naval assets execute a plan that was set in motion weeks ago, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Because what happens next will either end with Iran at the negotiating table accepting terms it swore it never would, or it will end with the Islamic Republic facing internal collapse. There is no third option anymore. Let's start with what Iran actually did and why it's not what it appears to be. At approximately 08:20 local time, 5 crude oil tankers began departing Iran's Karg Island terminal in what Iranian media immediately framed as a triumphant breakthrough of the U.S. naval blockade. The vessels, identified through ship tracking data as the MT Arman 114, MT Serena, MT Darren, MT Lotus, and MT Fortune, each carrying between 1.8 and 2.1 million barrels of crude oil, departed in sequence with approximately 40-minute intervals between each departure. Iranian state television showed carefully edited footage of IRGC Navy fast attack boats conducting high-speed maneuvers around the tankers, creating the visual impression of military escort and protection. The voiceover declared this a historic defeat for American naval imperialism and stated that Iran's sovereign right to export its natural resources cannot be blocked by any foreign power. The messaging was clear and coordinated. This was designed to look like Iran had successfully called Trump's bluff. That the U.S. naval blockade, which Washington had threatened would be absolute and comprehensive, had failed at the first real test. That ships were loading Iranian oil and departing, and the mighty U.S. Navy was powerless to stop them. Social media accounts linked to the IRGC immediately began circulating the footage with hashtags in Farsi, Arabic, and English, celebrating the end of American dominance and claiming that resistance wins. Pro-Iranian accounts posted maps showing the tankers' routes heading toward the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting these vessels would successfully transit to international waters and deliver their cargoes to waiting buyers. But here's what makes this entire narrative a deliberate deception, and here's where Iran's propaganda collapses against hard reality. Every single one of those 5 tankers is being tracked, not just by the U.S. Navy, but by the most sophisticated maritime surveillance architecture ever deployed. Their automatic identification system, AIS, transponders, which they are required by international law to operate, are broadcasting their exact positions every few seconds. Those positions are being correlated with synthetic aperture radar satellite imagery from commercial providers like ICEY and Capella Space, which can detect vessels regardless of weather, darkness, or whether their transponders are active. But it goes deeper than that. U.S. Central Command has access to signals intelligence from the National Security Agency that monitors all radio communications, satellite phone calls, and data transmissions from these vessels. The National Reconnaissance Office has repositioned classified surveillance satellites to provide continuous overhead coverage of the Persian Gulf. P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft are maintaining 24-hour airborne surveillance, using AN/APS-137 radar systems that can track multiple surface contacts simultaneously out to ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles. In other words, Iran can put those tankers to sea, but Iran cannot hide them. Iran cannot disguise their cargoes. Iran cannot obscure their destinations. And most importantly, Iran cannot protect them once they leave Iranian territorial waters. The U.S. strategy isn't to create a physical barrier that prevents ships from leaving Karg Island. That would require maintaining a permanent naval presence directly off Iran's coast, within range of Iranian anti-ship missiles, mines, and coastal defenses. That would be militarily risky and strategically unnecessary. Instead, Trump's blockade strategy is far more sophisticated and far more devastating. Let the ships leave. Track them everywhere they go. Intercept them in international waters. Seize the ships or force them to turn back. Sanction any company that touches them. Sanction any port that receives them. Sanction any country that purchases their cargo. Make it impossible for Iran to find a buyer willing to accept the consequences of dealing in Iranian oil. Make it impossible for these tankers to offload their cargo anywhere in the world without facing immediate seizure or crippling sanctions. Turn every tanker that leaves Iran into a floating liability that no one wants to touch. This is economic warfare at a level Iran has never faced before. And the regime's propaganda celebrating these tanker departures is about to collide with the reality of what happens when those ships reach international waters. Here's what Iranian state media will never broadcast, and what is happening right now as those 5 tankers steam toward the Strait of Hormuz. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, positioned in the Gulf of Oman just east of the Strait of Hormuz, has received updated targeting data on all 5 vessels. The strike group includes the carrier itself with its air wing of over 60 aircraft, 2 Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers equipped with Aegis combat systems, and 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers carrying a combined total of over 500 vertical launch cells loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 and SM-6 surface-to-air missiles, and anti-ship weapons. But the surface fleet is only the visible component. U.S. Navy submarine assets, the locations and numbers of which remain classified, are operating in the Gulf of Oman and northern Arabian Sea. These submarines, likely Virginia-class attack boats, are equipped with advanced sonar systems, torpedoes, and Tomahawk missiles, and are capable of tracking surface vessels while remaining completely undetected. As the Iranian tankers approach the Strait of Hormuz, they will enter the narrowest section of the waterway, just 21 miles wide, where Iranian and Omani territorial waters come within 2 nautical miles of each other, leaving only a narrow corridor of international waters in between. This choke point is where Iran believes it has maximum leverage. This is where Iran has positioned anti-ship missile batteries, where IRGC fast attack boats operate, where mines could theoretically be deployed. But this is also where every Iranian vessel becomes most vulnerable to observation, tracking, and interdiction the moment it exits Iranian territorial waters on the eastern side of the strait. According to standard U.S. Navy interdiction protocols, which have been refined through decades of sanctions enforcement operations from Iraq to North Korea to Venezuela, the sequence of events will unfold like this. First, as each tanker exits Iranian territorial waters and enters international waters in the Gulf of Oman, it will be shadowed by U.S. surface vessels maintaining parallel courses at distances of 2 to 5 nautical miles. This is close enough for continuous visual and radar contact, but far enough to avoid any claim of harassment or unsafe navigation. Second, the tankers will receive radio communications on international maritime distress frequencies informing them that they are transporting sanctioned cargo in violation of U.S. economic restrictions and international UN Security Council resolutions related to Iranian proliferation activities. They will be ordered to heave to and prepare for boarding and inspection. Third, if the tankers refuse to comply, and they almost certainly will because they're operating under IRGC instructions, U.S. Navy vessels will take positions ahead of and around the tankers, reducing their speed and maneuvering options. Helicopter assets, including MH-60R Seahawks from the destroyers and cruisers, will conduct low passes to demonstrate capability and intent. Fourth, if the tankers still refuse compliance, U.S. Coast Guard Law Enforcement Detachments, LEDETs, which are specially trained boarding teams that deploy aboard Navy vessels specifically for maritime interdiction operations, will execute opposed boardings. These teams, equipped with small arms and supported by helicopter-borne snipers and armed drone overwatch, will fast rope or boat transfer onto the tankers, secure the bridges, and take control of the vessels. The tankers will then be escorted to U.S. facilities in Bahrain, the UAE, or another allied port, where their cargoes will be seized and the vessels held pending legal proceedings. Crew members will be questioned, released if they're commercial mariners simply following orders, or detained if they're found to be IRGC personnel. This is not theoretical. This exact sequence has been executed multiple times over the past 2 years against Iranian tankers attempting to deliver oil to Venezuela, Syria, and other sanctioned destinations. In August 2023, the U.S. seized over 1 million barrels of Iranian crude from the tanker Suez Rajan. In April 2024, the U.S. diverted the tanker Virgo and confiscated its Iranian cargo. Just 3 months ago, in January 2025, U.S. forces boarded and seized the MT Avalon, carrying 2.1 million barrels of Iranian condensate. Iran knows this playbook. Iran has watched these seizures happen repeatedly. And yet, Tehran is sending these 5 tankers anyway. Why? Because Iran is out of options. Because Iran's storage facilities are at 87% capacity and rising daily. Because if Iran doesn't get oil out of its terminals, production will have to be shut in, causing permanent reservoir damage that could cost Iran hundreds of thousands of barrels per day in production capacity for years or even permanently. Iran is choosing to send these tankers knowing they will likely be seized because the alternative, shutting down production, is even worse. This isn't defiance. This is desperation disguised as defiance. While Iran's propaganda machine celebrates tanker departures, the regime's own internal assessments paint a catastrophically different picture. And leaked documents from Iran's Ministry of Petroleum, reported by Persian-language opposition outlets and corroborated by energy intelligence firms, reveal the true scale of the crisis. As of 72 hours ago, Iran's total crude oil and condensate storage stood at approximately 117 million barrels out of a maximum theoretical capacity of 135 million barrels. That represents 87% utilization. Industry standards dictate that storage should not exceed 85% for safety and operational reasons. Iran is already in the danger zone. Iran's current production levels are running at approximately 3.1 million barrels per day, down from 3.4 million barrels per day before the blockade due to technical issues and preliminary shut-ins at older fields. Iran's domestic consumption is roughly 1.9 million barrels per day. That leaves approximately 1.2 million barrels per day that must either be exported or stored. Before the blockade, Iran was exporting between 1.4 and 1.6 million barrels per day, mostly to China through a combination of legitimate sales and sanctions-evading schemes involving ship-to-ship transfers, flag switching, and falsified documentation. Even with those evasion tactics, Iran was barely balancing production and exports. Now, with the U.S. blockade in full effect and enforcement being carried out with a level of intensity never seen during the Obama or Biden administrations, Iran's effective export capacity has collapsed to near zero. The 5 tankers that just departed represent approximately 10 million barrels total, roughly 8 days of surplus production. Even if all 5 successfully evade interdiction, which is extremely unlikely, Iran would need to repeat this operation every single week indefinitely just to prevent storage from overflowing. And that's simply not possible, because every tanker that attempts this route will be tracked, intercepted, and most likely seized. Insurance companies are already refusing to cover vessels carrying Iranian crude, making it nearly impossible to find ship owners willing to risk their assets. The few companies still willing to transport Iranian oil are shadowy networks of front companies operating aging vessels that are, themselves, subject to sanctions and seizure. Here's where the math becomes absolutely brutal for Tehran. If Iran cannot export, storage will reach maximum safe capacity in 11 to 15 days at current production rates. At that point, Iran faces the nightmare scenario: shut in the wells or start dumping oil. Shutting in wells at Iran's aging fields, many of which have been producing for 40 to 60 years, risks permanent damage. Reservoir pressure declines when production stops. Heavy, waxy crude can solidify in the wellbore. Formation damage can occur. Petroleum engineers estimate that Iran could lose 300,000 to 600,000 barrels per day of production capacity permanently if major fields are shut in for more than 60 days. That's not just lost revenue during the blockade. That's lost production capacity for years after any eventual resolution. That's permanent economic damage to Iran's only significant source of hard currency revenue. Iranian Oil Minister Mohsen Paknejad has reportedly held 3 emergency meetings with Supreme Leader Khamenei in the past week. According to sources cited by Iran International, Paknejad presented 3 scenarios, all of them devastating. Scenario 1. Continue production and accept storage overflow, leading to potential environmental catastrophe and uncontrolled crude releases. Scenario 2. Shut in 1 to 1.5 million barrels per day of production immediately, accepting permanent damage and long-term production loss. Scenario 3. Accept Trump's terms for lifting the blockade, which reportedly include complete nuclear program dismantlement, IAEA inspections of all facilities, permanent cessation of uranium enrichment, and ending all support to proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. All 3 scenarios represent regime-threatening crises, and Khamenei's response, according to the leaked accounts, was to order continued production and continued attempts to export by any means necessary. That's the order that led to these 5 tankers departing Karg Island. That's the desperation driving Iran's current strategy. And that's why this defiant move is actually the regime acknowledging it has no good options left. If you've been following US-Iran relations for the past 20 years, you might be thinking, we've seen this before. Maximum pressure, sanctions, blockades, threats, Iran always finds a way to survive. And you'd be right to be skeptical because previous administrations applied pressure and then provided relief before the pressure became unbearable. But what's happening under Trump in 2025 is fundamentally different from anything Iran has faced before, and understanding why requires looking at how policy has evolved. Under the Obama administration, the strategy was pressure for negotiations. Sanctions were imposed, but always with the explicit goal of bringing Iran to the table for a diplomatic agreement. When Iran came to negotiations, sanctions were eased. The 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal provided Iran with massive sanctions relief, access to frozen assets, and renewed oil export opportunities. Iran took that economic lifeline and used it to fund Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, and Assad's regime in Syria. Iran pocketed the concessions and continued its regional aggression. Under the Biden administration, the approach was de-escalation and re-engagement. Biden signaled early that he wanted to return to the JCPOA framework. That signal alone gave Iran breathing room. Sanctions enforcement became inconsistent. Iranian oil exports to China surged to over 1.5 million barrels per day because Beijing understood Washington wasn't serious about enforcement. Iran interpreted Biden's approach as weakness and accelerated its nuclear program, reaching uranium enrichment levels of 60%, just short of weapons-grade 90%. Trump's 2025 approach is neither pressure for negotiations nor de-escalation. It's economic destruction as a strategic objective in itself. The goal isn't to bring Iran to the table for a deal. The goal is to create economic conditions so catastrophic that Iran's regime faces a binary choice: total capitulation or internal collapse. There is no relief valve. There is no promise that if you negotiate, we'll ease sanctions. The message is stark: dismantle your nuclear program completely, end your regional aggression entirely, and accept intrusive international verification, or watch your economy implode and your regime fall. This is maximum pressure without the carrot. This is economic warfare prosecuted with the objective of winning, not bargaining. And Trump's team has made clear, through both public statements and private diplomatic channels, that they are willing to maintain this pressure for as long as it takes. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated explicitly in a Financial Times interview last week that the blockade will remain in place until Iran's nuclear infrastructure is permanently dismantled or until the regime falls. There is no third option. That kind of clarity is something Iran has never faced from an American administration before. And it's why Tehran's options have narrowed to the vanishing point. Iran's leadership is not naive. They understand the economic pressure is designed to be unbearable. So the question Tehran is grappling with right now is whether military escalation can change the calculus and force Trump to offer concessions. In the past 96 hours, Iran has taken several steps that appear designed to test American resolve and possibly create conditions for escalation. Action 1. IRGC forces conducted announced naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, involving over 100 fast attack boats, mobile coastal defense missile batteries, and simulated mine-laying operations. The exercises were clearly timed to coincide with the tanker departures, sending the message that Iran could close the strait if pushed too far. Action 2. Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen launched drone and missile attacks on Saudi oil facilities at Ras Tanura and Abqaiq. While the attacks were intercepted by Saudi air defenses with U.S. support, the intent was clear. Iran can threaten regional oil infrastructure and spike global oil prices if the pressure doesn't ease. Action 3. IRGC Quds force operatives attempted to infiltrate U.S. facilities in Iraq, according to U.S. Central Command reports. 2 suspected operatives were detained by Iraqi security forces in coordination with American advisors. This suggests Iran may be considering attacks on U.S. personnel as leverage. Action 4. Iranian state media broadcast threats from IRGC commanders stating that if Iran's oil cannot be exported, no country's oil will be exported through the Persian Gulf. All of these actions are designed to signal that Iran retains escalatory options and is willing to use them. Iran wants Trump to believe that maintaining the blockade will lead to regional war, oil price spikes, attacks on American forces, and a broader Middle Eastern conflagration that will be politically costly for Washington. But here's why that strategy is failing. Trump has already demonstrated through actions in his previous term and current military deployments that he is willing to use overwhelming force in response to Iranian aggression, and he has positioned assets to do exactly that. The U.S. currently has approximately 45,000 military personnel in the Middle East across bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, and afloat. That includes 2 carrier strike groups, USS Harry S. Truman and USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Over 200 combat aircraft, including F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, F-15 Strike Eagles, and B-52 strategic bombers forward deployed to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries protecting critical facilities across the Gulf. Multiple amphibious ready groups carrying marine expeditionary units capable of rapid deployment. Cyber and space assets capable of disrupting Iranian command and control. If Iran attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz with mines, the U.S. Navy has pre-positioned mine countermeasure vessels and can clear the strait within 72 to 96 hours while simultaneously destroying Iranian naval assets. If Iran attacks Saudi or Emirati oil facilities, U.S. air power can obliterate IRGC bases, missile sites, and command centers within hours. If Iran targets American personnel, Trump has made clear the response will be direct strikes on regime leadership and critical infrastructure. In January, after IRGC-linked militants launched a drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan that killed 3 American service members, Trump authorized strikes that destroyed 17 IRGC facilities across Syria and Iraq and killed at least 2 IRGC commanders. The message was unambiguous. American casualties will be met with devastating retaliation. Iran's military options are, in reality, almost all bad. Any escalation significant enough to force Trump to reconsider the blockade would also trigger a U.S. military response that could cripple Iran's offensive capabilities for a generation. And Iran's leadership knows this. So the threats continue, the exercises continue, the rhetoric continues, but actual escalation remains carefully limited because Tehran understands that crossing certain red lines would be suicidal. Iran is trapped between economic collapse if it doesn't escalate and military devastation if it does. While the Supreme Leader projects defiance and the IRGC stages propaganda victories, sources inside Iran paint a picture of a regime increasingly divided and desperate. According to multiple reports from opposition media outlets, including Iran International, Radio Farda, and independent Persian-language journalists citing sources within Iran's government, 3 significant internal developments have occurred in the past week. Development 1. A heated confrontation occurred during a Supreme National Security Council meeting between IRGC commanders and officials from Iran's regular military, the Artesh. Artesh commanders reportedly argued that the IRGC's aggressive regional policies have brought Iran to the brink of catastrophe and that the military is being asked to defend strategies it was never consulted on. IRGC commanders responded by accusing the Artesh of defeatism and lack of revolutionary commitment. The meeting reportedly ended without consensus and with Khamenei ordering both sides to maintain unity. Development 2. Iran's oil workers' unions have begun quiet discussions about potential strikes if the government moves forward with large-scale production shut-ins that would result in mass layoffs. Union representatives have reportedly communicated to the Ministry of Petroleum that workers will not accept being scapegoated for the regime's failures. This is extraordinarily significant because labor unrest in Iran's energy sector could paralyze the economy even faster than the blockade itself. Development 3. The Iranian rial has depreciated another 12% in the past 4 days despite intervention by the Central Bank of Iran. The unofficial exchange rate is now approximately 820,000 rials to $1 compared to the official rate of 42,000. This represents a nearly 95% loss of value over the past 3 years. Ordinary Iranians are watching their savings evaporate in real time, and social media monitoring shows a dramatic increase in criticism of the government even on state-monitored platforms. Food price inflation is accelerating. Bread, chicken, and rice prices have increased 30 to 45% in the past month alone. Pharmacies report shortages of imported medicines because sanctions and the blockade have disrupted supply chains. Power outages are becoming more frequent in provincial cities as the government prioritizes electricity for Tehran and major urban centers. All of this is creating the conditions for renewed mass protests of the kind that erupted in 2019 and 2022. Those previous protest waves were brutally suppressed. In 2019, security forces killed an estimated 2,500 protesters. But each successive wave of unrest is larger, more widespread, and more difficult to control. The regime's internal security assessments, according to leaked summaries reported by opposition outlets, now estimate that sustained economic pressure for 60 to 90 more days could trigger protests that security forces may not be able to contain without creating a political crisis that fractures the regime itself. In other words, the clock is ticking, and time is not on Tehran's side. We are now at the point where this crisis must resolve in one of 3 ways. The status quo, Iran attempting defiant gestures while economic pressure mounts, cannot be sustained indefinitely. Within the next 30 to 60 days, one of the following scenarios will unfold. Scenario 1, Iranian capitulation. Facing imminent economic collapse, widespread domestic unrest, and internal regime fractures, Iran's leadership concludes that capitulation is preferable to catastrophe. Through intermediaries in Oman or Qatar, Iran signals willingness to accept Trump's terms. Negotiations result in an agreement where Iran dismantles its nuclear infrastructure under permanent IAEA verification, ends enrichment programs, halts support to regional proxies, and accepts intrusive inspections. In exchange, the blockade is lifted, sanctions are eased, and Iran receives economic normalization. This represents total strategic defeat for the Islamic Republic's revolutionary ideology, but allows the regime to survive in a drastically weakened form. Hardliners within the IRGC would view this as surrender and could fracture from the government, but Khamenei and pragmatists could argue that preserving the regime is more important than preserving the resistance axis. Probability 40%. In the next 48 hours, we will see whether those 5 tankers successfully evade U.S. interdiction, which is extremely unlikely, or whether they become the next headlines about American forces seizing Iranian oil and delivering yet another blow to the regime's credibility. Either way, the strategic trajectory is clear. Iran's defiance is not changing the balance of power. It's merely delaying the inevitable reckoning. If you want real-time updates as this situation unfolds, if you want analysis that goes deeper than headlines and connects military movements to economic data to political calculations, subscribe to this channel immediately and turn on notifications. We are monitoring ship tracking systems, satellite imagery, military communications, and sources inside Iran to bring you the most comprehensive coverage available anywhere. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think Iran's tankers will be seized? Do you think they'll somehow evade interdiction? Or do you think this leads to military escalation? Which of the 3 scenarios, capitulation, escalation, or internal collapse, do you believe is most likely? Your analysis matters, and I read every single comment. This is me. Iran is defying Trump's blockade with 5 oil tankers. The U.S. Navy is tracking every movement. And the next 48 hours will show whether defiance changes anything or whether it simply accelerates Iran's path to strategic defeat. I'll see you in the next update.